Chairman Burkhart, you are live.
Thank you, Ryan. So next up is our U.S. Forest Service topics. So with that, Ryan, I think if you would admit the Forest Service.
Mr. Chairman, I believe most of them should be in the room already.
Okay, well, I don't see them.
Hi, this is Jason Robertson. Can you see me now that I've spoken?
We can, and I like the background.
Okay, fantastic. All right.
For the record, if you would just identify yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Jason Robertson. I'm the Forest Service Director of Recreation, Lands, Minerals, and Volunteers for the Rocky Mountain region.
Okay. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, Chairman Boner and Chairman Burkhart and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on special uses. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and would like to give you an overview of our special use process. I understand the committee has received previous updates on streamlining the special use permitting process, particularly as it relates to outfitters and guides on the Shoshone National Forest. And that you got that testimony from Acting Regional Forester Tricia O'Connor in 2020 and from Forest Staff Officer Mike LaFrenz in 2018 and 2019. I'd like to start by speaking broadly and giving the committee a better understanding of how our permitting processes work before addressing our specific work in the state of Wyoming. First, what is a special use authorization? Simply a legal document such as a permit, term permit, lease, or easement that allows occupancy, use, rights, or privileges on National Forest System lands. The authorization is granted for a specific use of the land for a specific period. Second, when is an authorization required? An authorization is needed in order to occupy, use, or build on National Forest System land for personal or business purposes, or if there is a fee being charged and income is derived from the use. Each year, the Forest Service receives thousands of individual and business applications for authorization for use of National Forest System land for such activities as water transmission, agriculture, outfitting, guiding, recreation, telecommunication, research, photography and video productions, and granting road and utility right-of-ways. Third, how do you apply for a special use permit? An application can be obtained from any Forest Service office or online. Most commercial uses require additional information with the application. You may need business plans, operating plans, liability insurance, other licenses or registration, or other documents. A pre-application meeting with the local Forest Service office is also required to discuss most proposals and application procedures, timeframes, potential land use conflicts, fees, and potentially additional coordination, such as environmental reports or field reviews. Our growing population and mobile society have created increased demand for a variety of uses of federal lands. Currently, the agency manages more than 74,000 authorizations on the National Forest System for over 180 types of uses, creating thousands of jobs and benefits to local communities. In the Rocky Mountain region, we administer 11,000 special use authorizations, which return $41 million to Treasury annually. This includes 4,100 recreation permits for about $36 million and 6,900 lands permits for about $5 million. In Wyoming, the region manages 1,665 special use authorizations that run the gamut of all of our programs. 5 ski areas alone in Wyoming have returned an average of $63,000 per year to the Treasury over the past 5 years. In fact, region-wide Forest Service recreation special uses generate more revenue than timber, minerals, or grazing on the national forests. In Wyoming, we are seeing an increased demand for commercial activities and associated special use permit requests on national forests. This demand includes activities for such things as recreation special uses and the use of National Forest System lands for communication purposes, including broadband deployment to rural communities and the nationwide broadband network for first responders called FirstNet. Communication uses located on National Forest System lands are an integral part of the nation's telecommunications infrastructure. They provide critical links for national security, emergency services, personal communications, as well as hydroelectric, gas pipeline, and electric transmission facilities. With increased demand also comes increased pressure to process special use applications. In recent years, the agency and the National Forest in Wyoming have undertaken steps to streamline and modernize those processes in order to address timeliness and efficiency issues in our special uses program. This includes piloting an online permitting system to expedite permit processing and expand the suite of available recreation opportunities. Under this system, visitors and commercial partners will be able to apply and receive recreational and special use permits electronically. This will take some time to fully implement, but even so, modernization efforts such as these have increased the ability to purchase Christmas tree permits online, and other programs are also underway. The Forest Service has also taken steps to improve customer service and expedite the approval of applications for communications uses, and to meet our statutory obligation under the Mobile Now Act, which requires the Forest Service to grant or deny the application within 270 days of receipt for a communications facility or a communications use. In 2020, we issued a final rule that amended our regulations and amended our directives to implement provisions of the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. It's also known as the 2018 Farm Bill, which streamlines the agency's procedures for evaluating applications to locate or modify communications facilities on National Forest System lands. Special use modernization efforts are also occurring at the local level. For example, in the past year, the Shoshone National Forest has streamlined the permitting process, processed more temporary use permits, and initiated a prospectus to increase the quantity and types of permits available to the public. The forest has adapted new temporary permit guidance. Specifically, the forest has allowed permittees to apply for temporary permits on an annual basis rather than every other year. This has resulted in broader opportunities for both permittee applicants and the public. The forest is expediting those permits deemed to have, to have nominal effects. These are activities that have little or no impacts. This reduces the complexity of required analysis and facilitates more rapid decisions and subsequent applicant notifications. The forest has also adopted a two-phase process to authorize new outfitting and guiding services for recreational activities. The new process has been very, very successful. In January 2020, the forest sent out a solicitation of interest to identify potential new services that could be provided. And the forest received 54 responses for uses ranging from shuttle services to ATV and UTV tours to progressive biking, which includes street and gravel biking as well as mountain biking, and then also floating and fishing and even paddleboard yoga. The forest analyzed the proposals and determined that 13 of these activities could be authorized without needing to be advertised through a competitive process. Those activities were summarized in an April 2021 letter from Forest Supervisor Lisa Timchak to Representative Larson. This last year has been challenging for all of us. The region is proud of the work we've been able to do to continue to support our special use permit holders. We've deferred billings, we've discounted low use against priority use review, which is a way of saying that we're balancing how much use they're getting and how much we're actually going to charge them. And then we've also offered assistance in amending activities and permits to allow for continued service while maintaining COVID safety measures. Last fall, during the pandemic, the regional office held a special uses strategy meeting where specialists from across the region shared innovative strategies and developed new strategies to make our processes more efficient. A critical component to this was a listening session where outfitters were invited to share what works well and what needs improvement from the outfitter's perspective. We recognize that maintaining and developing strong working relationships with local communities, current and potential outfitters, and the public is key to our success in meeting demand for quality outdoor recreation experiences on all of the national forests in Wyoming. We look forward to building upon these relationships now and into the future. Chairman and committee members, this concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you for taking the time to receive this update from me today, and I welcome questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Roberts? No questions? Interesting. So with that then, Mr. Robertson, I have a few.
Okay.
Last year especially, and I live in the southern part of the state, and it's mostly the Medicine Bow National Forest that my constituents are interested in and concerned with. I had a lot of, I don't want to call complaints, I guess concerns about what people described as over camping on Medicine Bow National Forest. And I witnessed some of that myself. Seemed like every wide spot along the road had a camper in it. Were there any efforts to control that? I know there's not a lot of control on the camping outside of established campgrounds, but I think I can recall some campers that were there literally from Labor Day till after, or from Memorial Day until after Labor Day. Any effort on the part of the Forest Service to control some of that? Or is it possible for you to control it?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. What you're referring to is what we call designated dispersed recreation or dispersed recreation. And that refers to the overnight camping that is not in a developed area, like a developed campground. And we are in the process of looking at how we can better administer designated dispersed recreation across the entire Rocky Mountain region. And this would be the process of identifying recreation sites and camping sites in particular, and where people could pull in and enjoy the experiences they're looking for, while also protecting the resource and helping to support those traditional activities on forests. I know you're referring to the medicine bow route. The other place where we're looking at this really closely is on the Bighorn in Wyoming. And the Bighorn Collaborative has been taking an active role in trying to identify ways that we can work with the public and better administer this type of use. Will it be in place in time for this summer on the Med Bow route or on the Bighorn? I'm not sure. We're trying to implement some incremental steps along the way right now. And some of our forests are looking at ways that they can do more with providing registered campsites in dispersed areas for reservation on recreation.gov. So we're looking at it. We know it's an issue. It's a concern for us as far as how we administer our resources in both visitation and habitat. And we will. I look forward to sharing some more updates with you in the future on this as we progress on it.
Mr. Robinson, I would, excuse me, I would appreciate that. I get a lot of people who have that concern. I've seen some of it myself. I guess I've seen some dispersed camping that frankly just, to me, was detrimental to the forest itself. I mean, it's dirty, filthy, stuff just abandoned right there. And I know that makes more work for your people to go in later and have to clean that up. So if there's any help that the state can provide on that front, be glad to. I think it's a collaborative effort, not to keep those forests in great condition and that sort of thing, especially after the Mullen fire last year. I think we're going to see a lot more pressure on the other half of the Snowy Range or Medicine Bow route forest. So thank you for that. The other thing is your permitting process, the online permitting process. I've used that myself and I think it works great. Just don't want to see it abused. I mean, I used it to get a Christmas tree permit and a firewood permit. And I think it worked out very well for me. Also cut some firewood on BLM land and had to go in and get a permit to do that. Literally, I live about 500 feet from the BLM office, so that wasn't a major event, but a lot easier to deal with the Forest Service and get that permit really within a matter of minutes. So hey, let's see, any other questions? Okay, I'll continue then. Mining permits on Forest Service land. You indicate, that's one of your responsibilities in that. How do those normally work? And how long does it take to get say a production kind of permit for a mine on Forest Service land, or to access Forest Service land to private land for that mining?
So in the Forest Service, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman, in the Forest Service, we're responsible for managing the surface estate. And we work closely with BLM on managing the mineral estate, the subsurface. And sometimes that involves surface disturbance, in which case then the Forest Service helps to review and evaluate the impacts to the surface. And that's a fairly standard process now. We have a good understanding of how that works, and fairly streamlined processes. It gets more complicated when we have endangered species or other wildlife concerns, habitat concerns, certainly. And then we also work closely with the tribes on consulting with them and helping to mitigate impacts to their interests. The timeline is, I would say it varies entirely by those those other impacts that I was just referring to, and how we mitigate them and manage them. So sometimes it can be a pretty quick process, and other times it takes quite a bit longer. We've been working on some different projects around the region that have taken, they've generally taken 3 to 7 years. It really depends though on again, on the scope of how much is going on and again, where we all are as far as working with our sister agencies.
Okay, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll tack on to that and ask about oil and gas pipelines across Forest Service land. What would the normal timeline be for a company interested in crossing Forest Service land? Are we talking months or years?
Mr. Robertson.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I think I would have to follow up with you on this question. I don't have an answer at my fingertips on it. It seems to be one that that's variable based on the amount of public interest and the amount of resource interest that we're examining.
Other questions? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, Mr. Robertson, could you, there be a possibility you could share that letter to Representative Larson with the rest of us as to the services and activities that you're working on or have worked on in the recent past anyway?
Thank you for the request. Certainly, we can share that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try one more time on the timeline for getting anything done in the state of Wyoming dealing with the feds. Is there any desire by the federal agencies to quicken the permitting process and shrink it down to a more reasonable timeline? When you said 3 to 7 years, I mean, I'm thinking, who in their right mind would wait that long to do a project in the state? But that's the norm now. I mean, that's where we're getting. We heard testimony this morning of 12 years for a 500-acre bentonite plant. It's getting out of control. Is there any level of sense of, hey, we're working on behalf of our neighbors and our people. We are the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let's do a service for our people and streamline these permitting processes, not just for special uses, but all across the board for stuff we like and stuff we don't like. It's public land. Is there any desire? Are you getting anything from Washington, D.C. that suggests that we will see some sort of streamlining of a permitting process to get things more to a rational timeline? Thank you.
Mr. Robertson.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and I think I misspoke a moment ago. I was in regard to our leases for right-of-ways or otherwise permitting for transmission lines and pipelines and so forth. The process tends to be quite a bit faster than what I described. I was referring to the process from start to finish for an entire project.
Okay. So other questions? So Mr. Robertson, you talked a little bit about FirstNet and broadband, and I know that takes quite a few towers. I guess my question is, are we going to have to be prepared to see a tower on every high point in Forest Service land? Because I would object to that, really. I'd hate to see one on top of Medicine Bow Peak. I've been up there. The view's tremendous, but I'd hate to see a communication tower of any kind put on that peak. But that's the way these usually go, is you put the towers on high points so you get a line of sight. Do you control things like that? Just your thoughts.
We certainly look at the scenic management and try to minimize the impact as to visual impacts from the implementation and the construction of these towers and the placement of these towers. We have a good track record there, and no, you certainly can't expect to see a communication tower on every peak. You might see some in some areas as broadband gets built out more and more, but increasingly broadband is also built on a fiber optic network that is That's based on buried cables. And so we are in the process of approving more and more of those and evaluating more of those requests. And we're looking at some bigger pipelines right now across the region. Those are primarily located in southern Colorado, but there is some interest that we're hearing from industry about moving further north as well into Wyoming.
Other questions? So, Mr. Robertson, to say apply for mining permit on Forest Service land, does that go through the local office or through the regional office or all the way to DC or a combination of all of those?
Thank you for the question. Yes, typically they go, application for a mining permit would come into BLM and would also come into Forest Service if Forest Service is involved. And then we would work together on evaluating the proposal and evaluating the different impacts and also exercising our individual agency authorities.
Okay.
And whether it goes, the question goes back to the WO, the Washington office for review. That's fairly common. Generally, we communicate on issues that are likely to get much media attention and try to make sure that we have an answer, or we have a plan that helps to address the common questions we get.
Okay. I guess I'm the only one asking questions, so so I'll continue. Hey, so your personnel in the field, like the local rangers and that sort of thing, just frankly, did they get out of the office enough? I spend quite a bit of time in the forest in summer and fall and that, and rarely do I see occasionally I'll see some of the people out there, but did they get to the field enough? When I don't see them, when I'm up there for a week and don't see anybody, I gotta wonder, because I mean, you do have to actively manage the forests, I think. So are you getting them out enough, or do they need more time? I think they need more time in the field. I'll answer my own question with that one. So again, your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know, speaking for myself, I would love to have more time in the field. So we have incredible national resources, we have incredible state resources, and there's so much to see and experience, and it's just such a pleasure to get that opportunity. As far as getting out in the field to actually manage the resources, yes, we do have people out in the field, and I think we're trying to do as much as we can and have as much of a presence as we can with the resources we have.
Okay, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shifting gears to timber, I get asked a lot about the price of lumber going through the roof, and why we're not logging as much as we should, and why is there a shortage of lumber. My typical response is we're not logging as much as we should, and the Forest Service, may want to ask them why they're not logging the forests like we used to. Has there been a policy shift with the Forest Service recently in light of the surge in lumber prices to release more acreage for timber sales to address the shortage?
Mr. Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I know certainly we've increased our production over the last couple of years, or the last 3 years, and it's been a real focus of our organization. And I'm not an expert on our timber program, and if you'd like me to follow up on that, I could. But otherwise, I know generally, yes, we've been really emphasizing this and have increased our production, and we've also added additional resources and staffing to help out with this work.
Yeah, and I think we have the regional forester up next week. We can talk to them about that issue too, because I had a similar question, but I think I'll wait, which is, I think we're trying to work on some cooperative agreements between the Forest Service and the state forester to start cataloging some of the forest to get it. We've done that with the BLM, but cataloging it and appraising it to get some of that timber sold, which really might go to waste if we don't. So, any other questions for Mr. Robertson? Mr. Robertson, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your patience for waiting for us. We're running a little behind and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So, hold on just a minute. Okay, with that, Mr. Robertson, are you able to address Executive Order 14,008 on 3030 issues?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for asking about that. I would just offer that I have I read Governor Gordon's statement, and I've also read the report on 3030. However, we're still waiting for a lot of information on how this might be implemented or rolled out to the units and to the states and to the forests. So I think there's more to come on that, and I know that we have really valued our collaboratives with the that we have around our forests and the support of our neighboring communities. So I think that will be an integral piece of this as it goes forward.
Right. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Robertson, for being with us here today. So as you read, especially the guidance that we have from President Biden, are there any current programs within the Forest Service that kind of come to mind that may be able to help with some of those more specific objectives?
Mr. Robertson?
Thank you for the question. Yes, again, we're waiting for more information and waiting to see what kind of direction we get as far as how to roll this out. Currently, we rely very heavily on these collaboratives in Wyoming, and also on the foundation of shared stewardship that we will work in partnership with the state and with local communities. So I imagine that that's part of our core identity right now, and that would be part of how we approach this in any complex situation with the state.
No. Okay. So, Mr. Robertson, is it safe to assume or say that, under Executive Order 14,008, your situation with the Forest Service is a little different than BLM's in that most of the forests are already defined. They're set aside for specific uses already, with a lot of that being conservation of the forest and that sort of thing. Is that a good way to look at it?
Thank you for that question. I don't think I can speak for the BLM. For the Forest Service, we do have a multiple use mission, and one aspect of that is conserving landscapes, but another aspect of it is looking at ways that we can use that landscape as well for other purposes. And so I think that we have a balance that we have to strike there.
Okay. A more specific question, and if you can't answer it, that's fine. So after the Mullen Fire took out quite a bit of forest in Wyoming and into Colorado. And that do you have any specific plans do you know of for the forest? I mean, it was parts of it were burnt to the point it burnt the dirt, literally. Other parts it burnt ground cover and that, but wide variety as you normally get with a fire of that nature. But what's the future look like, other than just let it regrow on its own?
I'm afraid I can only answer a small part of that question, Mr. Chairman. The part that I'm familiar with is on the recreation side, and we are actively looking at the burned area emergency rehabilitation, the BEAR work, and how we can reopen trails and camping areas and restore some of the recreation opportunities for hunting and fishing and other recreation that were in that landscape before the fire. And we're still, given the timing of the fire, I know that we're still working on finalizing that plan and getting it implemented, although there are incremental steps that are already occurring now to stabilize the landscape.
Okay, so, and that would lead to a follow-up on my part then. The other half of the Snowy Range, because it literally burnt approximately half of the snowy range forest. The other half, have anything in mind to work on prevention in that area?
I will, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have to defer that question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that we have been working on clearing trails that have been closed by trees that have fallen, beetle kill trees, and we've done a good job of reopening a lot of trails across the region, and that's been very productive.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Robertson? Yes, not. Okay. Mr. Robertson, thank you very much for your time and testimony, and again, for your patience waiting till after lunch. And I don't see any more questions here from the committee. And that if you think of anything in the meantime, just you can send it to us through staff and they can get it to us. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. Appreciate it.
Right. So with that, I'll open public comment on this portion of our agenda. Ryan, do we have anybody in Zoom land who wants to testify?
Chairman Burkhart, we do have Mr. Krasper from the Wyoming State Forestry Division, who's able to answer questions if you have. And
okay.
we also have a representative from Senator Barrasso's office.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and admit the representative for Senator Barrasso's office, and then when we're done, go ahead and admit Director Krapp or Forester Krapser.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
My name is Shelby Shields, and I'm Senator Barrasso's Ag, Public Lands, and Indian Affairs Legislative Assistant here in DC. And I actually don't have very much to add to this section. I have some things prepared about the Black Hills National Forest Timber Advisory, but I did just want to quickly add to the conversation about 30 by 30. I know you guys had a really good conversation earlier when I was listening with both Joe Budd and Bob Budd, and I think Senator Bittman had maybe been talking about just having like a database to talk about what kind of numbers Wyoming has for them that are conserved. And I think that's a really great idea. We've been at the staff level trying to come up with what that number looks like. I've been working with lots of people in the state to try and come up with that, but it gets a little bit complicated, like you guys were all saying, with different overlap areas, but Wyoming has done such a great job with conservation that we really want that to be the message. If the Biden administration won't define what conservation is, I think Wyoming has a really great story to tell in that perspective. So other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but nothing more on that.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Shields? Any questions? I guess you escape our questioning.
I feel lucky.
For now. Thank you very much. Are you just hang with us if you would, in case we do have questions? Thank you.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and let Forester Krapser in?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Bill Krapser. I'm the state forester for the state of Wyoming. Senator Boner asked me to kind of update you all on Good Neighbor Authority, where we're at working with our federal partners, both the BLM and particularly the Forest Service on Good Neighbor projects. Quick history, Good Neighbor was a pilot program about the year 2000, only in Colorado and Utah. What Good Neighbor does in a nutshell, it allows the federal agency to make an agreement with state agencies for us to do work on Forest Service or BLM lands. In 2010, Senator Barrasso introduced a bill to expand Good Neighbor Authority. That bill didn't pass. He kept trying at it, and finally in 2014 in the Farm Bill, Good Neighbor Authority was expanded to all national forest, all BLM lands in the country. State Forestry entered an agreement with both Regions 1 and Region 2 of the Forest Service, what we call a master agreement. We also have an agreement with the BLM to be able to do projects. We started working particularly with the Medicine Bow, but with all the forest in the state, putting together good neighbor projects. In 2020, you all passed a piece of legislation in the legislature that allowed us to have a revolving account where we could put federal money that we were able to gather to do good neighbor projects in that account. In that legislation, you also authorized us to hire 4 AWAC seasonal type positions and 1 permanent position. With the proviso, we had to show we had federal funds available to pay for those positions to do this type of work on federal land. To date, we have over 25 projects either completed, started, in progress, or in the planning process across the state. Most of those are heavy to the Forest Service. Most of those are heavy to Region 2, but we actually have active projects right now on the Black Hills, the Bighorn, the Medicine Bow, the Bridger Teton, and on BLM. The projects run everywhere from fuels mitigation, fuels work around on Forest Service or BLM land around communities, to actual commercial timber sales. We've also, of the positions that you authorized, we also have a AWAC position up on the Black Hills, working with the Black Hills National Forest, putting timber sales together, 1 on the Bighorn, and then we have a shared position on the Medicine Bow that we've had for several years, who that individual works on state lands, BLM lands, and Forest Service lands, doing cross-boundary projects. So to date, Good Neighbor's been really successful for us. I think it's kind of exciting with what we've been able to do. We also have a statewide Good Neighbor coordinator that we've been able to put in place. That position, we actually got the funding from the Forest Service for that position before you all gave me the authority to hire a statewide coordinator. So we subgranted the dollars to the Council of Western State Foresters. So our statewide coordinator actually works for the Council of Western State Foresters, spends about 75 to 80% of their time focused on Wyoming projects. The other 20-25% of their time is working on good neighbor policy west-wide. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I know Senator Boner, you had some questions about other states or anything, but I'll pause and take any questions that the committee has on good neighbor.
Questions? Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make sure I understand, Mr. Crapser, it sounds like of the 4 positions we've authorized, are they all full now?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, no, we have 2 of those that the Forest Service is able to fund. We are in discussions with a couple of the other forests and with the BLM about funding the other 3 positions, but right now we only have 2 of those filled.
Other questions? So, Forester Crapser. The good neighbor policy, I know in the Medicine Bow Forest in that area, in around Carbon County, at one time, if I remember right, that program was actually more than paying for itself. Is that still the case?
Mr. Chairman, we believe it is. Right now, we're using federal dollars to fund any of the positions. We have timber sales that we are collecting stumpage for and being able to put that money back into the national forest on the Medicine Bow, on the Black Hills, and it looks like we will have one in the Bighorn here very shortly. So I think it's been a successful tool. I'll let my colleagues from the Forest Service, when the regional forester is talking, to say whether it's been useful for them or not, but I think we've been able to leverage state resources and our state ability. One of the good things about Good Neighbor Authority, and the example I'll use, is we did a thinning contract for the Forest Service on the Medicine Bow. With the dollars they had I believe they thought they could get about 300 acres completed. We were able to use state contracting to do the project, and we got over 550 acres done just because we were able to administer our contracts cheaper. So I think there's a lot of advantages, but like everything else, it's another tool in the toolbox for the federal agencies. We've also been able to do a lot of cross-boundary work with it. I know Representative Winter, you asked a question of me the other day that I on the Ag Committee that I probably didn't do a very good job of answering, as far as getting fuels work done, fire prevention type work. We've been able to use our priorities and our forest action plan, work with the Forest Service, the local ranger districts, the local national forest, and done several cross-boundary projects using Good Neighbor on the Forest Service side of the line, using federal Widen Authority grants that we can get for adjoining lands on the private side of the line, and get a lot of fuel work done. Mr. Chairman, in your county, Ryan Park is a great example of this. We're doing projects on both sides of the boundary to try to make that community a lot more fire resistant, fire wise type community. In case if the Mullen fire had run the other direction than it did, Ryan Park would have been right in the crosshairs.
Thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I know that with the current Good Neighbor Authority program, we're dependent exclusively on federal funds, and that's fine by me. But I'm wondering if, especially as we look to spend, I guess, the state's portion of other federal funds through the ARP, ARPA, is it a possibility that the state of Wyoming could contribute financially to this Good Neighbor program if the legislature believes it's prudent?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I think that would be an outstanding idea. Several of our neighboring states have actually been able to put some state money into Good Neighbor and to kind of jumpstart it in some areas with either acres on the ground or some staff. Like they always do, state of Idaho went all in right away. They actually have 14 full-time people just doing Good Neighbor Authority in the state of Idaho. And those positions are about half state funded, half federal funded. Montana's moved forward with several positions. South Dakota, Utah, and Colorado, for the most part, have been more like us and utilizing federal dollars to leverage that. But I think it's one of those things, it's easy to get into the debate, should we be using state resources to manage federal land? But when you look at it, that almost half of our state is federal lands, if we can leverage work being done on federal lands for management, I think it's a good thing.
Any other questions? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you following up on my question from the other day, Director there. And so I think it's really important that we do all we can to prepare for a fire season. And so I really appreciate you looking into this a little further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Winter, I answered that question the other day, and I have to honestly say, for some reason, my wife was watching part of this, and I got home and she told me I was a mealy-mouthed bureaucrat. And so I didn't want that to be how the committee looked at me. So I wanted to clarify that. As far as this fire season goes, and I know the Forest Service may touch on this too, we've been working really close with the counties and with both the BLM and the Forest Service to make sure we have as much resources as possible available. Last year we did aggressive initial attack, probably more so than normal. As you know, we had 2 single engineer tankers that the state had under contracts. First time we've done that. The governor's authorized that again for this year. And I think that'll be pay off in dividends if the fire season develops like I'm afraid it will.
Other questions? No, okay. Forrester Crapser, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here and just hang with us in case we have other questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Ryan, do we have anyone else out there?
Mr. Chairman, there are a handful of other folks from the U.S. Forest Service, but there's no other public comment or nobody with their hands raised at this time.
Okay, so thank you. Hold on just a minute. So anyone in the room wish to make public comment? And I'll give deference to Ms. Wagner. You're just again here to observe. Okay. That's what happens when you come to meetings that you weren't directly invited to attend. You get asked. So thank you. So with that, any other comments on this portion of our agenda? Okay, with that, I'll close public comment. And I believe up next is discussion of Black Hills National Forest and timber harvesting program. So Ryan, if you would admit those Forest Service personnel who are speaking on this one.
Good afternoon, Chairman Boner, Chairman Burkhart, members of the committee. I'm Frank B. I'm the new permanent regional forester for the Rocky Mountain region of the USDA Forest Service. As you know, the Rocky Mountain region.
If you're new, welcome.
I'm sorry?
I said, if you're relatively new, welcome to the committee, welcome to the area.
Oh, thank you.
Be here.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm new to the area, but I spent a lot of my early part of my career in the Rocky Mountain region. And I'll touch on that here in just a minute, but thank you for the welcome. As you know, 4 national forests in Wyoming are part of the Rocky Mountain region, including, of course, the Black Hills, the Bighorn, the Shoshone, and the Medicine Bow National Forest, as well as the Thunder Basin National Grassland. Really want to thank you for the invitation to come before the Wyoming Select Federal Natural Resource Committee today. So I would like to take the opportunity to introduce myself to you a bit. I've been a forester for 40 years with both state and federal government. Past positions have included serving as the Director of Forest Management for the 13-state southern region of the Forest Service, and then also as acting National Director of Forest Management for the agency. So I started as regional forester here in the Rocky Mountain region in April of 2021. I think this is my 7th week. I'm really honored and humbled to be back in the Rocky Mountain region. I spent much of my early career both as a seasonal and a permanent employee on 5 national forests in the region, including here in Wyoming, on both the Shoshone and the Medicine Bow National Forest. And of course, that's a pretty nice piece of the Shoshone National Forest behind me there. In fact, both of my sons were born in Wyoming, and I look forward to working with you in my new role in the coming years. So I understand the committee has requested remarks on the timber harvest program on the Black Hills National Forest. Timber is one of the many important values on the forest. While I have not worked in the Black Hills specifically, I've always understood that the Black Hills National Forest to be a special place for many people for many reasons, with exceptional hunting, fishing, and camping opportunities, significant tribal cultural values, outstanding wildlife habitat, and a steady flow of wood products to improve forest resiliency and provide jobs in a rural economy. A healthy, sustainable Black Hills National Forest is essential to all who enjoy the area. We're committed to the long-term sustainability of the Black Hills, and we use the best available science to inform our decisions. We are currently reviewing the general technical report on timber sustainability on the Black Hills National Forest, which was recently published by the Rocky Mountain Research Station. We'll fully consider this information along with a broad suite of data, gather stakeholder input, and consult with tribes before making final decisions on future timber program levels on the Black Hills. This will require a thoughtful and balanced approach to address both environmental, social, and economic conditions in the area. So in reviewing this information, we did recently discover some issues in our environmental analysis for several planned timber sales in South Dakota. As a result, we canceled 3 advertised timber sales this week. We did not take the action lightly, and we do understand this decision will impact the timber industry. But we felt we needed to take a second look and make sure we were compliant with the National Environmental Policy Act. So we plan to complete work on these timber sales to ensure they fully comply with the National Environmental Policy Act and hope to re-advertise them in the near future. So looking to the future, sound forest stewardship will likely require adjustments to our timber program on the Black Hills, and we can speak more about that here coming up. However, long-term forest sustainability will also require a viable timber industry to help maintain forest health and resilience while providing jobs in the rural economy. We're focused on both the short-term and long-term future on the Black Hills. Forest Supervisor Jeff Tomac and I are committed to working together with all concerned to find a path forward that ensures we have a healthy forest for all to enjoy its many benefits long into the future. So now I'd like to turn to Jackie Buchanan, Deputy Regional Forester for the Rocky Mountain region, for a more detailed discussion, and we'll be happy to take questions after and possibly address some of the other questions that came up in the previous section. With that, Jackie?
Ryan, do you need to admit Ms. Buchanan?
Mr. Chairman, she's in here, but she may need to unmute, or I may be able to do that.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. May I continue or may
Please.
I start? Okay. Chairman Bonner, Chairman Burkhart, and members of the committee, it's great to be back with you again today. I have been Deputy Regional Forester for 6 years now and worked on the Bridger Teton prior. So good fortune to have be able to spend quite a bit of time in Wyoming. And so as my regional forester said, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail around the Black Hills and the current and future timber program. I think much of the information, or quite a bit of the information I'm going to go over, was presented in some form earlier this year when we had Acting Regional Forester Tricia O'Connor, and then I think we did a follow-up letter. This was back in the fall, November, with you all to, I think, maybe answer a bit more information that you had requested. But for today, you know, the Black Hills had a target for 2021 of 175,000 CCF. And we are doing everything we can to work towards achieving that. Now, as Frank just said, we've run into a couple of issues, mainly on the South Dakota side with some of the sales. So we're going to work through that and attempt to get those. If we've taken 3 sales off this week, we're going to attempt to get those back out before the end of fiscal year 21. And if we don't actually achieve that, we'll get them out early in the next year. But we are working towards that 175,000 CCF for the 21 year fiscal year 21 accomplishment. If you look at the last 11 years, really that period from 2010 to 2020, the Black Hills alone sold nearly 2 million CCF in saw timber. Now, 2020 was a year that impacted not just the Black Hills, but every forest almost across the country, but certainly in our region. 2020 was a tough year, dealing with the COVID limitations, dealing with some really wild weather variations, staff vacancies, and the ongoing funding challenges that we had. 2020 was a tough year, and I think the Black Hills came in right at about 125,000 CCF. And so we recognize that, and we're trying again to do what we can for 21 to accomplish closer to the 175,000. We here in the Rocky Mountain region, I think as the agency, have a strong commitment to a sustainable timber program on the Black Hills. The region has a vested interest and a responsibility in supporting local economies, including maintaining a viable timber industry. However, I think we all recognize that the current levels of harvest on the Black Hills that we've especially seen over the last decade may be difficult to sustain. The Black Hills of today is...
Just a moment, please.
Oh, yes, sir.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Buchanan,
Yes.
the 197 that we were going to do in 2020, and we only got 125, does that 72,000 CCF carry over to 21 so we can harvest that in 21?
Ms. Buchanan?
Many of the sales that we had lined up for that 2020 year, we've pulled into fiscal year 21. But our target this year, and again, a lot of it is tied with the funding that we have, that our annual appropriations is 175,000 CCF. So as we look forward into what is sustainable going into the future, we're adjusting and pulling what sales we need to forward. So just as we ran into some issues last year, we're, as Frank shared, having to make some adjustments with sales that we were putting forward in 21. So the forest is doing an assessment, and they are looking at, are there other sales we can pull forward? So we're constantly trying to work to at least maintain, or get to the target that we've established. But it's tough. It was tough last year, and with the current situation we're dealing with, we're scrambling a little bit right now to see what we can do. So our goal right now, the target that the forest has for 21 is 175,000 CCF.
Chairman,
Follow up?
So that 175,000 includes the 72,000 carryover?
Ms.
We
Buchanan?
pulled some of that forward, and again, as I just said, with some of the adjustments we're making with sales that we were going to put up this week, or bids that we are going to open this week, we're swapping sales out. And so we had to do some of that last year due to different situations. And so again, it's not as easy as just pulling those sales forward. It's constant adjusting and trying to figure out the best path forward.
Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a strong commitment and recognize the importance of a sustainable timber program on the forest. We have a responsibility in supporting local economies, including helping to maintain a viable timber industry. So we're going to move forward and see what a sustainable program looks like on the Black Hills. And as I was just saying, the Black Hills of today is not the same as it was 5, 10, or 15 years ago. And you all know even better than we do some of the impacts that have caused that changed landscape in regard to the mountain pine beetle epidemic. They've had some large wildfires and some wind events. We've had a couple of tornado-like situations that have had some major blowdowns there over the last 20 years. And so those events, accompanied by the timber harvest that we've been maintaining the last 15 years, it really has resulted in a more open and low density forest. And so we're trying to figure that out. All of you know, you've heard that in March, the Rocky Mountain Research Station did publish what we call a general technical report. You'll hear us refer to it as a GTR. And it lined out multiple scenarios, 60 in particular, 60 harvest scenarios using a range of volume mortality rates, volume gross growth rates, and 4 different harvest levels. The GTR did identify 23 of the 60 scenarios that could be considered a sustainable rate of harvest, ranging from 72,400 CCF to up to 126,700 CCF. So in our endeavor to ensure a long-term sustainability of timber resources by using the best available environmental, social, and economic data and science to inform both short and long-term, a short and long-term timber program. This will include the GTR, the recently published GTR, but it will also include current forest plan direction, our forest inventory and analysis, what we refer to as FIA data, and the October 2020 National Forest Advisory Board recommendation, working with both our state foresters in Wyoming and South Dakota. The goal will be to manage for a long-term sustainable timber program, considering all of the data and information which includes the social and economic implications to those local communities. We do believe that the best opportunity to address the change conditions on the Black Hills and determine the appropriate long-term harvest levels will come through a forest plan revision process. The current Black Hills National Forest Plan, or Black Hills National Forest Plan, was actually established in 1997 and amended twice, once in 2005 and once in 2008. We plan on publishing a notice of intent, what we call an NOI, probably in late July, to officially initiate this forest plan revision process. The Black Hills is pursuing a forest plan revision with an open and transparent process, and we anticipate that's probably going to take 3 to 4 years to complete. I think at the November meeting, the committee also asked the region to think about other potential solutions to address the forest timber supply, because we recognize there's impacts happening to the industry. One of the consideration that we think would be helpful is to review, and I think what you asked for is for us to review other potential timber sources from non-federal lands to understand if opportunities haven't been explored to support both short and long-term industry needs. We also believe that increased forest management and timber harvest on non-federal lands, including state, county, and local government, private, and other non-federal ownerships, could help supplement or offset any decrease of forest timber program outputs on U.S. Forest Service system lands. Additionally, what we're doing is looking at what potential volume might exist on neighboring national forests that lie within the working circle of the Black Hills. This volume could as well help to offset any reductions in the Black Hill National Forest Program. A big thing for us, all to remember, and that we are certainly focusing on, is there is a need for timber stand improvement work on an estimated 160,000 acres on the Black Hills National Forest. This work is going to be vital to increasing growth rates to provide for a future saw timber program. Developing markets or offsets for this work would benefit the forest industry and local economies. So the Forest Service and our Forest Service state and private forestry program, including our Wood Innovations and Community Wood Energy Grant programs, possibly can assist with this in retrofitting existing infrastructure or developing new infrastructure in the Black Hills area to deal with this small diameter material. There are quite a few USDA grant opportunities that might also be an option for this, and we're working really hard to explore those and see what might be available. We know these are challenging times, and we are fortunate to have strong partnerships and working relationships with the state of Wyoming. Now more than ever, and Bill was just speaking before we got on, our ability to work across boundaries with states and leveraging those partnerships, some of which Bill spoke to, really will help us to increase our capacity to deliver on that priority work. The shared stewardship agreement between the Secretary of Agriculture and the state of Wyoming that we signed off on last August 2020, really does establish a great foundation for working together across boundaries. And we already have, as Bill indicated, examples of this work occurring, such as that Good Neighbor Authority that he spoke to. Together, we can steward the whole rather than focusing on a unit by unit effort. And we can certainly work smarter to find those efficiencies in sharing the resources, again, as Bill spoke to, across units to do that priority work. The National Forest in Wyoming provides many benefits to the people of this country and to that state. We recognize the importance of the timber industry and the products that come from national forest system lands in the state of Wyoming. There will continue to be much more work done and difficult decisions to make as we work together to increase the pace and scale of forest management activities that will result, we believe, in healthy, diverse, and more resilient forest. So Chairman and committee members, this concludes my part of the prepared remarks. And we do look forward to a continued positive and productive working relationship with the state of Wyoming. And both Frank and I we welcome questions, and we are available to answer those that you may have at this time.
And Representative Anderson. Senator Anderson. People keep
Thank you,
changing,
Mr.
so
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I
Jack,
apologize.
do you have the information? You got a lot of information on the Black Hills here because I think we asked for it. Do you have that information on the Bighorns? It used to be a few decades ago, we had a real viable mill in Sheridan, and they got shut down because they couldn't get enough timber out of the Bighorns, which kind of surprised everybody that had ever seen the Bighorns. But they had to shut completely down. Do we sell any timber out of the Bighorns?
Buchanan?
Chairman, if I may?
Yes, please.
Yes, we do. And actually, even as recently as this morning, I was visiting, well, I visited with my regional forester, Frank, but I was visiting with Steve Lohr, our Director of Renewable Resources. And one of the areas that we are looking at for opportunities, if we have to make some adjustments in other locations like the Black Hills, we're looking at the Bighorns to see, what those options are to increase some of the timber options coming off of that forest. I think even talking to Steve this morning, of course, it comes down to shifting funds and having money available for that. But Andrew Johnson is the forest supervisor there, and I think he's committed to working with us to see what we can do. So we are selling sales off the Bighorn, and we are assessing future opportunities for what that might look like.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow
Follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So where would that timber go? Would that go into the Bighorn Basin or clear over to the Black Hills?
Well, it's an open process. I mean, we will get bids, and so it's open for, I mean, you could have bidders come out of Montana. It could go to the Black Hills. I mean, it's a competitive process. So we can't answer or guarantee it will go to a certain location. What we try to do is work towards, putting those sales up, and then we'll see what happens.
Other questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested to learn a little bit more about this timber stand improvement work. It seems like that's says here some important to increase the growth rates. And as I look at this GTR that came out in March, that there's a range of possible scenarios, and that growth rate is pretty important in determining the harvest level. And so I'm just wondering, could you just give us an example what timber stand improvement work is, and how it will have the potential to affect that growth rate?
Ms. Buchanan?
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, if I may. So we refer quite often to pre-commercial thinning, and you are, sir, quite accurate in saying that it is important, that growth rate is an important factor for how that forest will move forward into the future. So we can affect it by doing this pre-commercial thinning work. And I think I spoke to that 160,000 acres that we've identified for where some of that work needs to take place. So that's one of the things we can do proactively to really ensure that we keep the forest as productive as possible. So that's a critical area. All of us, myself, my regional forester, Frank Bem, and Steve Lohr, we have all and will continue to express that in regard to a need of additional funds, need of additional resources to carry that work out. But it is a very important factor for the future of the Black Hills. Actually, all of our forests, but in particularly the Black Hills.
Follow up, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And you have to forgive me, I'm not familiar with how timber harvesting works or anything like that. So you just explain what is pre-commercial thinning? Who does that? Is that something that a private company does? Is that something that the Forest Service does? what even are the activities associated with that? Just a little bit more detail.
You know, that's
Please.
most often, I'm sorry, if I may, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
please.
It is most often something we would contract out. When we speak to the importance of economic viability in the community and the potential for doing what we can to enhance that, you know, that would be additional economic opportunity to have that work increased in regard to the number of acres we were dealing with on an annual basis. And, you know, the key to anything, a significant key, let's just say, for economic development is having something that isn't just going to be one and done, like done in a year. Because for folks to make an investment, you've got to be able to look out and say, you know, this is going to continue for a while. And we do believe that the need for this pre-commercial thinning and the opportunities it would bring would be something that would be ongoing. And so it would be contracted most likely, and it would add in additional opportunities for that community, for all those communities.
If I could add just a bit to that, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Yeah, so a great question, and Jackie did a great job of responding. I'll just add just a couple pieces. So when we say pre-commercial, that means we can't sell it. It doesn't pay its way out of the woods. So we have to pay somebody to do the work. That's what we mean by pre-commercial. It's not yet commercially harvestable where it pays its way out of the woods. And the other piece I would add is, I started my career 40 years ago, as I mentioned, on a thinning crew, a timber stand improvement. We call it TSI crew down in southern Colorado. We used to do a fair amount of that in-house. We don't do that so much anymore. We typically tend to contract that type of work out to folks who do that all the time. And then we also have the ability to use stewardship contracting. And again, I'm fairly new to the region. I'm not sure how much stewardship contracting we've done here in the Rocky Mountain region, but that is a way to kind of trade goods for services and get some work done if we have the ability to provide some goods as well, so we can help to pay for that work that's so necessary. So it is a cost factor that we've got to work in to figure out how we pay for all the work that we need to do. Just want to add that. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
And once again, sorry, this is a new concept to me. Just want to make sure. So there's no end product that's being sold on the commercial market. You're simply going in, and that's why there's a constraint based off of budget. It's literally the Forest Service paying for this activity with no revenue available to anybody at the tail end of the process. Is that correct?
Well, actually, maybe not, because you know, you've probably heard us speak to the need for having some biomass options. So like, you know, in gypsum in Colorado, we have, you know, they take small diameter stuff and generate electricity with it. And so I think there's a host of options that, you know, we've all been looking at. That's part of you know, the work that we're doing along with our both state foresters into, are there some avenues that we could find or have established that could take that small diameter wood and do something with it. So, you know, that's something we're working hard and on, and we'll see where we get with it. But it's potential.
Other questions? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Buchanan, could you give us some insight as to the Forest Service position on salvaging timber after a fire? The one I'm concerned about most is the fire about 3 or 4 years ago on west of Du Bois on the Shoshone Forest. You know, there used to be a couple of sawmills there in Du Bois, and I don't believe there's one there now. And they could have done a lot of work in that area of the forest before it burned. So can we go in there and salvage that at this time? Is there any thought to that effect?
Ms.
So
Buchanan?
sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
Sorry, trying to remember my manners. So we constantly assess, especially after a fire goes through, of what are the options for salvage. And it varies from location to location. It varies, I don't have the exact details on that fire in my head, but it's, there's a time period for when that wood is even viable, depending on how severely it's burned or not. So we look at all of those opportunities, in regard to when a fire goes through, is there some way or some ability to do that salvage? And so we can I can find out the details on that particular fire, and how they assessed it or what they arrived at, because I just don't have the details right now. So we'll be glad to get that back for you. But I will say that the very point that you brought up of there used to be sawmills that operated in that Du Bois area, and there aren't now. That's when we say that we recognize the importance of maintaining a viable industry. That's a point right there, sir, for why we are so committed, because once you lose industry, I've never seen it come back very often, if ever. And so that's part of why we are so committed to trying to work with the industry we have left, to maintain that and support it in a way that will keep them viable. But we'll get back to you on that sale or that fire on the Shoshone, sir.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay, with that, if you would stay with us, please. Are there any public comments on this portion of the agenda? Ryan, do we have anybody out there wishing to comment?
Chairman Burkhardt, I don't have anybody on the list. Looks like we got a hand raised now. One moment.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Shelby Shields with Senator Barrasso's office is back to speak to the committee.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee again. Thank you guys so much for giving us the opportunity to provide an update today. So like I had said earlier, my name is Shelby Shields and I represent Senator Barrasso, and I handle his agriculture, public lands, and Indian affairs portfolio here in DC. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the Black Hills National Forest timber sale program from our perspective, and what kind of the timeline's been like this spring. So first, I wanted to thank you, this committee, for sending the full delegation a letter at the beginning of the year that really pointed out the disparity between the Black Hills National Forest Advisory Committee recommendations and the draft report that the Forest Service was working with, that the Forest Service has talked about today, that draft report. And so that was just really helpful for us to know your guys' perspective. And so I just really appreciated getting that letter. And then on March 3rd, the Wyoming and South Dakota full congressional delegations sent a letter to Chief Christensen, really outlining similar concerns about this potential reduction in the timber sales program on the Black Hills, and really urged them to follow the Black Hills National Forest Advisory Committee recommendations. So we also wanted the Forest Service to substantially increase the involvement from the states of Wyoming and South Dakota. We've got some really great foresters to look at the input from county commissioners, other local stakeholders. I mean, these issues have been around for a long time. Our office sent a very similar letter in 2018 urging similar things. And as Jackie and Frank pointed out, on March 23rd, USDA Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station released that report. And so the report was not great for timber sale outlook on the Black Hills. Jackie mentioned it analyzed 60 scenarios considering timber growth, mortality, harvest levels. There was some red flags that we had seen in the report and had talked about on some briefings that we've had. Just a few numbers seemed a little bit out of context, including standing live inventory numbers and saw timber growth rates. But really the conclusion of that report was that the Black Hills doesn't support current harvest levels of 181 CCF, and they recommend closer to 72,000 to 90,000 CCF each year. And so talking to some some of the industry that's working on the Black Hills that, is not a good outlook for them. That is not, it's not going to work for their bottom line. And that report is really a stark contrast from what the Black Hills National Forest Advisory Board recommended for commercial saw timber. And their recommendation was to stay at the 181,000 CCF for fiscal years 2022 to 2027. And so on the DC end, we've contacted at the staff level several times, trying to get an answer to our letter and requesting a briefing for us. On April 7th, the Rocky Mountain Research Station did host a public webinar on the report, which was really helpful. It was open to the public, so I'm sure there's quite a few people on this that tuned in, and maybe got some of the questions answered, but not quite all of them. On May 5th, Chief Christensen did send us a response, which really reiterated what Jackie and Frank talked about today, that they're going to take all sides into consideration when they're developing the forest plan, which is going to get looked at this summer, and that the report isn't a policy or a decision document. And so with that all being said, this last Thursday on May 20th, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which Senator Barrasso is the ranking member, held a really great hearing on forest management, forest products, and carbon. And so there was just some really great conversations there. Ben Wadecki with the Intermountain Forest Association, he represents Jim Nyman's sawmill in Hewlett. He works out of the Black Hills, and he testified there and gave some really good testimony and had some really good back and forth with some of the members, really explaining kind of the intricacies of the problems that the Black Hills is facing. And Senator Barrasso and Mr. Wadecki had a really great conversation about the recent closing of the Mill City, South Dakota mill, and just they talked about the report and just how we can start managing our forests a little bit better with timber harvesting, the hazardous fuel reduction treatments, livestock grazing, salvage logging, really just taking a full look at how to manage our forests. And so moving forward, I know that the Forest Service talked about those timber sales that recently got canceled, and that's also concerning. So hoping that those can resume as soon as possible. And also with the Black Hills National Forest scheduled to revisit their forest plan, really hope that the Forest Service is going to look at those advisory board recommendations and really using sound science, taking in the economic impact of the community, and utilizing all the local input that we talk about all the time. And our office just knows and appreciates how important timber harvesting is to the Black Hills and the surrounding communities. It really hits close to home when Hill City sawmill is closing, and how we can just kind of keep some of these communities alive. And so that's really all I have for the update for you today, but I'm happy to provide any of these reports or letters, but it sounds like you guys got quite a bit of background already, which is great. But our office is always happy to be a resource if you do have anything, but I'm happy to take some questions today too, if you have any.
Questions? Any questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up differences of opinion between the Forest Service and the advisory group as to what qualifies for sustainable harvest levels. And just wondering, I'm looking through this report now, that the GTR that came out in March, and trying to get a little familiar with their methodology. I'm just wondering if you have any perspective into the differences of methodology that led to the differences of opinion between the two groups.
Ms. Shields?
As for the certain methodology, I guess I'm not completely sure on what the difference is. The Forest Service might have a little bit better perspective.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Shields. Ryan, anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anybody else on the list. If there is somebody in the room that wishes to be recognized, they could raise their hand. But I don't have anybody else, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Anybody in the room? Any more public comment? Okay, with that, I'll close public comment. And I think that concludes all of our testimony today, Mr. Co-Chair. So I think with that, I'd ask staff, well, let's talk about those potential bills.
Okay.
First, go ahead, Mr.
Sure.
Co-Chair.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate everybody being here today. I think we've had a formative discussion on a wide range of issues. But, you know, in thinking about some potential action the committee can take, remind everybody that we do have the ability to sponsor legislation as a committee, dealing with issues under our purview. And so along those lines, I do have a motion going back to I'll actually always deal with the BLM topics. The first one would be to get a bill draft going based off of what was Senate File 149. And basically the idea behind that one for those who, well, I guess the House members and maybe some senators who don't remember, would be to reduce the severance tax rates at a rate that would be revenue neutral if there was an increase in federal mineral royalty rates. And that's something I think the Petroleum Association brought up, and we discussed a little bit, the threat in particular of increasing the oil and gas royalty rate. The idea would be to reduce the severance tax rate for those minerals and only the affected minerals in a way that would be revenue neutral to the state. And so as it currently stands now, we reduce it for every 1% the feds increase their royalty rate, we would reduce ours by 0.48. Since we see a corresponding increase in the FMRs coming to the state, since we get 48% of those FMRs. So that's the idea behind the bill. And I'm certainly not advocating for getting an exact bill draft of the Senate file because it did need a lot of work, but that's a concept that we could put forward, and it'd be something that provide at least a little bit of certainty for industry right now. I think there's a significant chilling effect. It would have the opposite effect on industry, and also, frankly, I think it'd be hypocritical for any legislator who's complaining about the federal government actions against oil and gas, or really any mineral extractive industry, to then turn around, stick our hands out and benefit from it, from those increased FMRs. So anyways, that's the motion and the justification for it.
Okay, seconded by Whitman. Any other discussion on the motion?
To give, sorry, is to get a bill draft going for our next meeting based off of that concept of Senate File 149. And so, but probably not an exact copy of that bill because it needed a lot more, which is why that's been so long.
And have that ready for our next committee meeting, correct?
Yeah, in August for sponsorship at the potential sponsorship by the committee in the 2022 session.
Okay, seconded by Whitman. Any further discussion?
Yes. Yes.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, motion passes. John, do you have that concept at least? And you can work with the co-chairman and myself and whoever else wants to be involved with that bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Co-chairman? Oh.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman, wasn't there a
Anderson.
request for a letter from us to someone?
Yes.
Do we need a motion on that, or are you just doing that?
You can do a motion.
I don't remember what it was for, but I remember we should do a letter.
I believe the gist of it, and staff has the notes, is to, ask the agencies to make a final decision on the expansion of the Bentonite. And issue a final decision in a timely manner. I have some notes. I'm not reading all of them. So is there a second? Seconded by Winter. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, motion carries. John, if you have questions on any of these, please just say so. Okay. Mr. Co-Chair, do you have another?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we also draft and well, it would be, you have to forgive me, it's for the special session. So move forward with whatever appropriate mechanism it is. It might be a bill draft, might be a letter to JC, because I'm just acknowledging ambiguity because we don't know how the special session is going to work. But whatever the vehicle is, that we find a way to propose that we provide $750,000 in ARP funding to consolidate information relating to lands in Wyoming that are already conserved or could be considered conserved under the 30 by 30 policy.
Is there a second? Seconded by Winter. Any discussion?
And
Senator
Chairman,
Anderson.
what are you thinking the deployment of that 750,000 is for any particular agency to use it to conserve or a particular one?
Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, it would be a holistic approach to all lands that are conserved. And as we discussed it, nobody seems to know what that means, but I think we can put our own definition forward. And if what I'm envisioning, and it doesn't have to necessarily be this way, we can say X% of land in Wyoming is a national park, X amount is wilderness area, X amount is in sage grouse core area, X amount is in a migration corridor, and just go down the laundry list and say this is the stuff that's already could be considered conserved in the state of Wyoming, to show where we're at already with this 30 by 30 initiative. And it sounds like the information's out there, but we might have to hire 1, 2, maybe 3 people temporarily to put that information together. And so that'd be the idea, just instead of having, it sounds like everybody kind of has their own little piece of the pie, but we need somebody who's going to be just to hire temporary staff. That's why it's ARPA funds. It's going to go away in 2024, but we can use a little bit to for personnel and maybe some computing power or whatever to consolidate information, present that information as sooner rather than later, so that we can partake in the discussion of what qualifies as conservation and what doesn't.
Chairman, I guess
Senator
we could
Anderson?
actually hire Mr. Budd to do that, or anybody. You're not saying it's somebody special. It could be anybody that would put it together for us.
Right. I don't think it's the role of the legislature to say you have to hire so-and-so, but we can provide funds and positions for a specific purpose.
I believe this is somewhat of a conceptual thought that we'll need to figure out where the money is assigned to and how we do it and some other things. But I think the concept is what we're considering.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just from an OSO standpoint, a bill draft is obviously a very different thing than a letter to the Appropriations Committee, for example. So perhaps a bit more guidance, or I guess, given the short timeline of the July special session, that would be appreciated.
Okay. So, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay. If there's going to be a special session in July, it'll be a bill draft. If there is no special session, it'll be a letter to the governor requesting that information. And as soon as we know whether it's going to be a special session or not, then that's when we'll work with staff to pursue one option or the other.
Mr. Co-Chair, one thing though, with a bill draft, my understanding is we may only be considering 1, 2, 3 bills covering broad areas during a special session, and this probably would go into one of those. So I think probably need to determine first how they want these recommendations, how management wants them, and where they will go before staff drafts a bill. And I know time is short, and we probably need to get on that here in the next week or two. John, does that fit okay in your schedule and what you were thinking?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as you indicated, the details of the special session are forthcoming. So we will internally try to figure out the details and then work with you and try to get the best approach put into play.
Okay. All right. I think, Mr. Co-Chair, does that
Hopefully
meet the
that's clear as,
concept here?
hopefully that's clear as mud for everybody else. too, but
Yes. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no.
No.
All right. So, anything else? So, motion carries. Yeah. Okay. So, John, we had some commitments from agencies and that. Do you have those? Just, could you go over them for us real quick so we're sure we will get what we asked for?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll do my best.
Okay,
And I guess just for the committee's benefit, I'll review the testimony from today to make sure that anything that's
Please.
is followed up on. So we were going to reach out to the BLM, try to get some additional guidance on section 212 from that executive order to understand where the language may have come from. This was in response to Senator Anderson's question in regard to the Conservation Corps and some of the programs that it seems that executive order is going to put into play. We were also going to circle back with the BLM, or they were going to reach out to us. But at any rate, the idea was to get more clarification on these concepts, for example, of environmental justice, what that actually means, and programmatically on the ground, what that's going to entail. We were also going to reach out to the BLM and get I guess, just an idea of the status of the projects that as a result of the Secretarial Order 3395, what projects were elevated to national staff so that the committee can have a better understanding of the particular projects that may have been caught up in that secretarial order. And then I guess my notes aren't clear on whether the committee wanted us to follow up on this or not, but you had spoken with the WCCA in trying to get an idea of the areas that were recommended for wilderness in the past, and then perhaps that list would also include areas that maybe were identified, but that the counties couldn't come to agreement on whether or not those places should be suggested for wilderness designation.
yes, I think that was the concept there. We just asked for that list, or they can give us a list. One's recommended, one's not, and I think there's one that's still just hanging.
Okay, so we'll follow up with the County Commissioners Association on that. The other topic had to do with National Forest. We were going to circle back with them and just try to get a little bit more information on the timeline for the authorization and construction, the permitting for pipelines when National Forest land is involved. Maybe try to get an idea of, a months long project, or multiple months as possible, or
I think
years.
While we were talking about pipelines, I think we were interested in that for all sorts of operations in the forest, not just pipelines, mines, broadband, everything they were doing. An idea of the timeline.
Okay, I guess my takeaway from their testimony is that the project itself would dictate the timeline. Were there particular types of projects that the committee was most interested in? Focus on pipelines, broadband,
Mining.
and mining. Okay. And then kind of to close out the U.S. Forest Service component, the committee had asked for perhaps a copy of the letter that was between Representative Larson and the agency.
Yes.
Oh, and then again, sorry, I wasn't sure what the committee's ultimate decision was, but there was also discussion in regard to what the Forest Service, what policies the Forest Service has in place when it comes to trying to address forests to prevent future burning possibilities, and what strategies they may have in place to try to address that type of issue.
Yes.
And then other than that, just the 3 pieces of action that the committee just voted on.
Correct. Okay. Committee, did we catch everything? Okay, I think we did. So I think that wraps it up for the day. So anything else, committee? All in favor? Aye. Okay, we are adjourned.